I would like to talk to our online participants how to follow programs without missing out anything important. There's Live tab. You can find a stream of our business program and several tracks online. We have industry track, investment track, and master class track. And don't forget about our partner events. You can find them in the program tab as well. Over 100 interactive virtual sessions on tech trends, development of new markets, business model transformation and integration of innovative technologies into business programs. And you can interact on each one of those with speakers and other session participants. Here's what you need to do. It's very simple. You should be registered or authorized as a user, and after that you can comment any session. And let me remind you that online participation is for a fee. And also, like any session, and follow activities of other participants of the conference. Ask your questions to the speakers. Use the Ask Question button. But you need to be a registered user for that. And now let's go back to our business program. Alexander Bloshenko, Executive Director for Advanced Programs in Science of the ROSCOSMOS State Corporation, will tell us about support for space startups. The session is called Support for Space Startups. Hello, colleagues. They misled you somewhat. I will tell you about promising areas of our corporation, where we're going, or about our plans, and I will focus on your attention on those areas where space startups will have the greatest value for us. Understandably, in the first presentation, Konstantin shared about somewhat about that. He talked about digitalization. I will also touch upon this area as well. And in the end, I will talk about specific plans to interact with space startups. You may know that this year we celebrate 60 years of the first flight into space by Yuri Gagarin, and you may be aware how difficult it was, how many technical and human risks were associated with those activities. In fact, when you think about it, space, outer space is hostile to human persons and our creations. And all the countries which were part of the Space Club, they were involved with preparing human beings and human equipment for being in space. So people were for space. But as space systems developed, and once the demand for satellite services were in demand, our smartphones, our portal, to have access to them. So we use them not only to make phone calls, but we use our smartphones to ask for a taxi or to ask for a pizza to be delivered. And you don't know how those signals get to you from which satellites, but as long as those services are operational, they're convenient, it works. And you may have heard something about Sphere program. It's one of our promising perspective programs, which is based on a new paradigm. It's not people for space, but it is space for people. Basically, we did a lot of work. Throughout a year and a half, we summarized all the needs by final users. We talked to state bodies, we talked to businesses, to private companies, to such large companies as Bank, to major telecom operators, trying to get from them not suggestions on satellite technologies, but some data and information that they would like to get from our satellite constellations. Because we understand that when we talk about driverless systems, we understand that we will have air or flying taxis eventually in the next decade, but airspace data, space infrastructure will be needed for that. And basically, space services, space data cover all the spheres of our activities: industry, logistics, transport, ecology, agriculture. And we already touched upon this topic before, so let me provide some specific examples, because many have heard of that but never thought whether it really functions. But I think it's a very telling example. For instance, such area, which is fairly new for us, as a digital twin of a region. We have Earth imaging data, we get a 3D picture, a 3D image, we have Atlas VR, we have a booth for it, and we have TerraTech, a specialized company that works on providing those services using remote imaging of Earth, and we prepared this interesting product that helps to have monitor construction sites or agriculture activities or dumps. And in this COVID situation that we now have on our hands, there was a sudden request for internal tourism, which actively develops because borders are closed, and regions were very interested in this digital product that would be used, virtual tours using VR. You can see it in our booth, and to see it for yourself what it looks like.
We also touched upon a topic of Kamchatka accident the end of last year. Lots of speculations arose, especially due to the fact that we had another accident on our other production facility. From the very beginning, we participated in supervision procedures over what was happening. Within several hours, we had satellite photos in different ranges. And we managed to dissipate those insinuations and provide the real state of affairs. This shows that we don't have the problem of receiving the data. The problem is to create the national or maybe international methodology of processing this data and providing the data to all the stakeholders. We're talking about private business and state representatives and so on. And another example, so we live in a country with different climatic regions, and one of the main topics is climatic situation. So the ice is melting, and it affects hazardous and critical buildings and facilities. This is very relevant to mountain territories. We are using radio locating satellites to watch over the movements of the terrain, and this is very important from the point of view of preventing extreme situations. We are using our services to have these services here and now. Another point of our agenda is carbon registration. On one hand, this is a world agenda, and people are saying that special measures of sanctions are going to be introduced because the carbon emissions have to be monitored. On the other hand, people are analyzing the carbon values of the territories, and people are talking about trading those, and we need to have a verified methodology to live in the world where we decide on our own where to locate the production or not, and we should always avoid those external sanctions. That's what we have to work on. We have it here and now, and our colleagues from Terra Tech are analyzing this picture. They have very interesting and non-standard algorithms which we would like to which we're using, and of course we are ready to review your suggestions on the focuses of startups, what would be interesting to all of us. We are interested in all the disruptive solutions and technologies which can be used to build up the analytics demanded both in Russia and in the world using the data which we receive from our satellites, and we are ready to review your opinions, to provide analytical expertise and to use it within the digital accelerator which has been announced today. This is a very important and relevant topic, because if we take a look at the general market in the field of space, only 3% of the money is dedicated to producing the spaceship and rockets, and 97% is something which is rotating around services and goods which are produced on this basis. And another example, right now we can look at territories from the orbit to locate forests or not, but we also can distinguish the species of the trees, and we can provide analytical data for the farmers in order for them to optimize their expenditures for fertilizers, for watering, and so on. So these services can be provided to the regions here and now, and our space capabilities allow us to do this. Several things cannot be viewed in a financial plane. We worked with Lisa Alert a bit, so I guess you all know it. So it's a huge voluntary movement, and we discussed various options of our support in their activities, working on algorithms and so on. And we understood that the main problem is actually location of the last points where a person has been seen, because when you're living for the forest and you lose the battery charge, and then in this case if you're also losing the cell phone connection, then you are lost, because we have to do the triangulation from the 3 points in order to locate people, and we developed a special technology. We can have special beepers which are going to have batteries which can be replaced once per several years, and these devices can be added to some wardrobe, clothes or whatever, so for old people, for small kids, and we called it the satellite lifesaver. So, and we decided that we could create those devices which are going to be integrated in the future to the normative base, to the regulatory framework, in order for the kids who are going to forests and so on to use those, in order to locate them if something goes wrong. This is more or less humanitarian thing. I do not want to think of it as of money, but we are living in the era of GLONASS. It's saving people on the road, and this service is really demanded as well. To sum up, this picture might be a bit difficult, but in the lower left part you can see the dots. So this is the coverage of the network, the satellite, the cell phone network. So this is the official data. You can see that our country is huge, and it's still not fully covered by the coverage. And we all understand that fiber optics cannot be pulled inside the territories with permafrost, so with deep frozen soil. And when we're going across Russia, so we lose the satellite connection and we are losing the radio. So, but we are all talking about the digital technologies and so on, but we cannot work with it without any satellite infrastructure, and especially considering the geography of our country, this foundation is going to be the satellite groups that we have. This is basically the picture of our program, the Sphere program. It is based on the requirements which are set by the market and the stakeholders. Right now we have 5 groups of distant remote probing of Earth. We are covering the whole country and the whole world and the Internet of Things. This is going to be the new function for us, and we are talking about wideband access to Internet and remote pictures of probing for Earth with various periodicity in different ranges, optical ranges, radio location ranges, and high resolution and detailed analysis. Basically, all the requirements which we received from the end customer have been already implemented through this building of the groups and through establishing the technical requirements to our space devices. So, speaking of methane or natural gas, the US is developing this topic very actively, and EU is also talking about the area next, the new carrier. And if we're talking about the space, so the newbies in the space activities like China is already talking about methane and recoverability. So we have a particular trend here and now. So why methane is actually? When we are talking about the returning carriers, we all want to see the picture which is going to be the same as the air situation. And basically, when we're talking about the launches, the aircrafts are only spending money for the fuel. With the methane, everything is going to be much simpler when we're talking about working with it. Also, we're talking about technical and thermal dynamic characteristics which are making this component more attractive. So, of course, the impulse, so which is located between the hydrogen and oxygen. So, methane is on a very attractive position, so it's ecologically safe. When you're burning it, you receive basically water and hydrogen, so it's processed very easily. And if we're talking about the faults in the carriers, usually we have problems with the engines if something goes wrong. And the engines might go wrong only if the pumps are damaged. So this is a very strict engineering entity, and we need to work on with the temperature there, and methane can solve most of the problems. Methane is coolable. Basically, we need to cool only the casing of the engine. There are small channels there, and the cold fuel goes through them, and it simply cools the casing. And of course, the temperature of fueling. Methane has about 160 degrees, and the oxygen is minus 180. They are close to each other, and actually we can combine various tanks compared to, for example, kerosene. So, and various components are of the same basically density and temperature, with the same mass and so on. And the mass is basically always the loss in the field of construction, in the useful load and the end price. In the end, I would like to say that at the end of the day, we have started to work on this, and last year we made a contract and we created the reusable carrier, which would go to the low orbit, and with the recovery of the first stage, and the oxygen, methane, fuel couple. We are not interested in using methane for methane. This is only a tool of achieving important characteristics which are important for us. And we have three of those in the specification. So the mass of the useful load which has to be carried, and ROSCOSMOS have seen the markets which require these sales most. So then we're talking about the reliability, and methane is going to help us to provide the hot reserving, so when we have failures of the engines, but we still keep on starting the rockets and fulfilling the mission, and of course the price. So, and here and now already we have the price of the launch service. $22 million to the low orbit without the acceleration block. This is very ambitious for us. We do understand that, however, that's the whole idea. We untied the hands of our designers, so we removed the requirements of military acceptance and the double evaluation and double source and principles of work, so which was used in the Soviet times. And we told the designers that the task is up to them. So whether they will create a square type of rocket or green one or whatever, so just you have a task and just go solve the task. This is a new approach to our field, and we have to develop staff as well in the field of competences, which we can hear about quite often, but we do not know where to use those. This is systematic engineers and designing for particular price. We are rebuilding the mentality of the designers for them to follow this new paradigm. When we want to have commercially oriented carrier, which is going to be open as well. One of the illustrations we compared several carriers. So the perspective carrier has twice as much details, actually twice as many details, due to these advantages of the fuel couple. So it lowers the expenditures, and simplifies the situation, and it makes it much more reliable. We will have automated stars, and on Soyuz 2 we had up to 300 people on scaffolds who are preparing the rockets for the launch. So this is the legacy of Korolev's 7 parts. So right now we're talking about light infrastructure on Earth. It's not going to be like Baikonur, it's going to be like a center in Kourou, when we don't have the underground cities and everything is rather light and nothing is buried under the earth. The launch table is lighted and automated preparation for the start. Fields of landing. We're going to have the recognition works, and we have seen various angles and the synchronous orbits of the Sun. What is really great is that we have Gazprom branch and Amur facility from Gazprom. So, and we are attracting those people for this work as well, because it makes no sense to develop anything else. So, because Gazprom knows how to work with the natural gas, with transportation and so on, and we are developing this drawing, and we are already cooperating with Gazprom for them to give us some cheap solutions which have already been proven useful. In general, we want to make it also touristically attractive. So it's all about the complex data. So we want to have a modern hotel, modern views for platforms and so on. So equipment platforms for the customers to come to the facilities to see the preparations for the launch, for us to provide good conditions for tourism in these launch pads. So, and this space tourism is very attractive. You wouldn't ever forget how the rocket launches into the sky. But of course the regulations are prohibiting it, and we cannot develop it enough. But we would like to turn this picture upside down, and it's going to also provide the interest of the community to this field, and it's very important for us. Our designers are live people. They go back home and they hear the critique in the social media. They need to have some positive emotional feedback towards what they are doing. So of course, when we're talking about the economists and the legal people, so we can attract those, and in a half of a year they will understand the whole situation.
But when we talk about designers and engineers, it takes time. From school days, you need to raise them. Sometimes the dynasties which are involved with that, that's the potential that we don't want to lose. We're building a multi-factor system to support them, to make sure they feel that what they do is important and it is positively perceived. So tourism, taking people to a cosmodrome, is a special area for us, and we consider that to be one of the objectives for us. When we talk about space activities, there is a major trend to use multi-satellite and hyper-satellite constellations, hundreds or thousands of satellites in orbit, like SpaceX is doing that. So regulation is needed for that, for space activities. There are only 2 countries in the world that has civil means of monitoring of space garbage and space objects. It's ourselves and the United States. And the Americans learned that we had the system. They learned only at the UN platform about that when they made a speech, and our delegation said, well, we do not agree with your conclusions, and they had to consult about that. So we do have that system. It's an automated system of warning of hazardous events. So we monitor low orbits. We're using Ministry of Defense facilities. We use optical systems for monitoring. So that's one side of the issue. And the other side of the issue, we see meteorites and meteors and space bodies. Like there was one over Chelyabinsk. There was an explosion, and there was no harm done in that case. So, but any space body when it has 100 or 200 meters in diameter, that can lead to a catastrophe at the human scale. So we don't want to become dinosaurs. We don't want to know ahead of time what space bodies pose a threat to the Earth. And we need to categorize and track them ahead of time and prevent those threats. And for that, we have a system. We have a Milky Way system, which will be added with Earth-based equipment and as well as with orbital constellation. Because if something comes from the sun, from that direction, you'll not be able to see it from here. Because they say when the sun is shining, you need to fly at nighttime. So here, if you want to see it, you need to see it at nighttime because the sun eclipses everything, and it makes it impossible to see those things. Another thing, so nuclear propulsion for space, which makes a lot of excitement, provokes a lot of excitement in social media. And our country really is ahead of all the world and all the tech communities. Back in the Soviet days, and satellites were developed which to be powered by small nuclear power plants, something like 6 kilowatt. So if you consider that to the International Space Station, so considering solar panel degradation, so that's the most expensive structure, which is as large as a soccer field. It's about 60 kilowatt in terms of power capacity. Americans bought back in the 90s several of our units. They took them apart, they reassembled them, and they said, okay, we have this ambitious project called Kilopower to have a satellite NPP of 10 kilowatt. So now we have a space system with 500 kilowatt power capacity. Then it should be scaled to 1 megawatt power. It's a modular its structure. What do we need it for? Basically, it's a replacement for energy, so not to have solar panels anymore. When we talk about energy intensive missions to distant space, there's no alternative to that. So we've been working on this for quite a few years. We have some critical technologies that have been identified to develop such vehicles. So Keldysh Center has some elements that are already operational. They have a testing systems there where they model those reactions, because we talk about nuclear cells. So we learn how to operate them and how to generate electric power. So we have a nuclear reactor inside with a special system, supporting this thermal system. Then we have extending frame, which is a very interesting composite structure that collapses. So because its length is very large, it's over 50 meters long when it's extended. And then you have those panels. Those are not solar panels. Those are radiators to get rid of excessive heat, because efficiency of translating heat into power, it's about 20%. So 5 megawatt of heat produces about 1 megawatt of electricity. So what do you do with excessive heat? We get rid of it. It just goes to outer space. But there's no media around, so you cannot have a refrigerator like on Earth. So you create infrared emissions. So, and there we have some useful load. So the idea behind this space vehicle is spacecraft. It's like a large electric outlet for space. So useful load module will be changed. So we will have So this module, and then a useful load module will be connected to it. And those modules have standardized docking systems and can be used for different purposes. For radio location, or maybe advanced engines can be installed there. There are two options which are being considered, but they'll not be using chemical fuel. So they'll be electric rocket engines. So they're very efficient. They can be working for a very, very long time compared to regular rocket engines. But propulsion is fairly small, but it makes sense to use them when you go far away, beyond Mars, for example, because their benefits become major in those situations, because propulsion is minor, but it is ongoing, so it's accelerating the craft all the time. So it facilitates many things. So tens of tons can be transported towards the edges of the solar system that way. We have contracts for this space complex, which is not the craft itself, which we have been working on for several years, but also its links to the Earth with a booster. So it's a comprehensive solution. And by 2030, we will have a first flight. We need to fine-tune and resolve some outstanding issues. Some of them have been already resolved. We have hardware solutions in place. And the first mission will have a fundamental and scientific, it will be a scientific breakthrough. We'll work with the Academy of Sciences to fine-tune ballistics. So it will be launched from the Earth. It will go around the Moon. We will drop off some useful load there. We'll be exploring the Moon. Then gravitational maneuver will take place, and the craft will separate, and then it will make a voyage to Jupiter's satellites. And a lot of scientific attention is given to those satellites of Jupiter, and Saturn also has its satellites. So they have ice on the outside, and underneath liquid oceans are found, and some tectonic activities are observed because the core is hot. So there are all the reasons to believe that some forms of life can be found there, and we should search for them. So this is a very interesting scientific objective, but you should have a very good spacecraft to deliver useful load there. So this complex has no alternatives for such missions. If we fantasize a little more, then going forward, we don't think that it is possible to go to Mars with a craft of conventional design. It takes 9 months to get there. So you cannot be in a small craft for 9 months, even in 6 months of being as cosmonauts at ISS in low orbit, and with things being worked out over many years, where they're protected by the magnetic field of the Earth. But still, people have to be rehabilitated for 2 years, because it's an aggressive environment for human beings. They have various problems with calcium and potassium being washed out, and the liquids of the body are redistributed in weightlessness. Because that condition is not like you're swimming in the Dead Sea in that warm water. It's like you're falling on the elevator. You keep falling, but every time you miss the Earth, you don't actually fall on it. So that means all the things, you kind of have butterflies in your stomach, and you're in that condition for 6 months. So it's a very special kind of pleasure, so to speak. Not everyone can handle that. And putting you into orbit is also very stressful. So it's impossible to travel to other bodies in the solar system using conventional designs. So this technology that we will have using this space complex STEM, Zeus. So it will be the foundation for orbital stations going forward, and those orbital stations will be transitional. And once again, in terms of scale, it's a somewhat of a fantasy. It's a visionary thing. So they'll be like Galaxy, Starship. They'll be large stations with modules, with artificial gravitation, with medical modules, with reserves of food, with greenhouses, with the ability to grow food, etc. Because so when you come to Mars after 9 months of travel, you will not be in shape to explore Mars and then coming back. I think it's a utopia. It's not doable like that. One of the options here, how you can work with Skalkova. There's this resident company, 3D Bioprint Solutions. So we had in 2018 and 19 a non-trivial space experiment where equipment was made by this company at its facilities. It's a Skalkova resident. Once again, then it was tested for being put on ISS. So, and we ran a space experiment, and we got a priority compared to Americans because they wanted to do that as well. But we were ahead of them by 6 months. And here's what experiment was about. You know about additive technologies. When you use powder or something else. So specially prepared cells were taken to orbit, and in this special device they were put together in the same spot. So it was not done layer by layer, but it was like a small ball, so they were put together from all the sides at the same time. So ferromagnetic liquid was there, and then we had a focusing point, and cells were put together around it. But not like as a multiple cells, but they were attaching to each other to form tissue. So why couldn't do that on Earth? Because gravitation brings down that focusing point. So we needed to have weightlessness, because magnetic properties of the liquid could not be increased because they would kill the cells. So we looked some tissues from not just random cells, but specific parts of the body with specific functions. So we did that and compared them to samples, controlled samples on Earth. So those prospects are for in vitro or for your other residents, because by printing those tissues with for specific disease, for oncological diseases, you can develop drugs using tissues, and so without expensive stages of preclinical and clinical trials. So that really simplifies and makes much cheaper the process of development drugs in all the areas, pretty much. And on top of that, going forward, transplantology, because it's prosthetics, like heart is one of the most complicated organs. So if you were able to do it, it would be really great. You know how difficult it is. Another thing, a curious thing, so when you build a system of blood vessels, some experiments were run with that 3D system when it was printed. It is just like an embryo in the body of the mother. It's something very similar. What happens there? So it opens a new page of knowledge for us, basically. So here's an illustration. Those constructs which were grown during the experiments in orbit. So that device is on the board of the space station, International Space Station. And there is also this area. In other countries, it is actively discussed. So to have steaks, you cannot take a cow with you, but cellular structures saturated with liquid that can grow and used for food, they have some potential. So that's a promising area as well, and we've been actively working on it. Another aspect of that experiment on board of ISS that was with plants, so growing plants, specific types of plants, to have your space vegetable garden for food. So far it's not quite well known. So can they produce seed? And what about changing generations? So we worked with some cereals. We worked with some legumes. But even watering is a problem. But how do you water them if it's in weightlessness? But we learned to do it. Another thing, working with highly organized, with sophisticated plants. So we do those experiments in orbit. So people have been in low orbits for 60 years, but some gaps still remain in our understanding. What does it take for human beings to survive in long space travels? Of course, life support systems cannot be infinitely sophisticated, and people will be adapted to those factors, and gene engineering and cellular technologies can be used. So drugs preparations for cosmonauts is done, and we also analyze things, those parameters. Blood pressure are monitored from Earth. And therapy is recommended, supporting therapy is recommended to each cosmonaut. So we will keep working on that as well, because for us this is something inevitable. So these are the areas which we consider to be promising. I painted with a broad brush, because all these areas, all your ideas that may fit in any way in these key areas of development, we welcome them. Composite materials to make things lighter, of our structural elements of rockets, and proposals on digital services and cellular technologies, or other interesting experiments to gain new knowledge and breakthroughs. So we are all interested in all these things, and we can work with you. Concluding slide, I'm going a little bit beyond my time. We did a lot of regulatory work, so licensing requirement has been cancelled. So when we do R&D, you shouldn't be licensed by ROSCOSMOS. We give you a certificate. We look at your proposal, where you want to work, your feasibility study, and then you can work. And then you can do R&D with models, with prototypes of your technologies. We have a one-stop shop at our portal for open innovations. All of your ideas can be submitted there, and then we will redistribute them among our experts to make sure you understand where you need to go from there, and we will need to know what to do next. We have some agreements with the Skolkovo Foundation, how different areas will be supported, and infrastructure of technoparks is there. We have a technopark with a system of precision machine building in Philly, and Sny Mash and Korolov as well. because a great testing facility and expert knowledge that will be helpful to you, so for you to test and fine-tune your experimental solutions. We also have some agreements with scientific and educational centers at the national level, so to work with universities as well. So some universities have testing facilities where you can test a small craft or a small engine. They can be integrated in their educational processes, and costs can be reduced for you as a result. Because to have a testing stand for 700 tons, so you'll pay too much for creating such a testing system. But using those universities, it becomes doable. So we'll be overseeing that. So those are entry points for you that we have created. So that's the last slide, I think. Thank you. That's it from me.
Жажда веселья, жажда путешествий, жажда общения. Утоляй любую жажду с освежающими вкусами Липтон. Мой любимый персик.
При низких температурах окружающей среды тела быстро теряют энергию. Но нахождение вблизи источника тепла позволяет телу получать тепловое излучение. Происходит самопроизвольное перераспределение тепла. Следовательно, когда источники тепла находятся вместе, их энергия побеждает холод. Лучшее создается вместе. Газпромбанк.
МТС Стартап Хаб. Работа с реальным бизнес-заказчиком МТС. Доступ к ресурсам самого крупного телеком-бренда в России. Не можешь поверить? А в твой стартап обязательно поверят. У нас есть все, что тебе понадобится. Ресурсы, клиенты, технологии, каналы продаж. Мы оценим твой продукт, правильно применим в своем бизнесе и масштабируем на мировой рынок. МТС Стартап Хаб ждет тебя и твоих нереальных бизнес-идей.